Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
In 1904, George Marvin came to Warroad to work for the Canadian Elevator Company. And he transferred here from a small town in Manitoba, Belmont, Manitoba. And he arrived on a January day, worked for the Canadian company for a couple years, and then left that company and worked for a Winnipeg company. In the meantime, the Canadian Elevator Company decided to dismantle their elevator here, and they rebuilt it in Saskatchewan. So George and his partner, Percy Roberts, purchased the remaining business and formed their own company. That company was originally called Roberts and Marvin. They had a lumber yard and a coal yard. They had a hardware store, and they got into pulpwood. In 1916, he asked his brother to come and help in the business. His name is William. The story goes that he could sell you a can of paint even if you didn't need one. He was very much a people person and was involved in the company. In the early years, pulpwood was very big, and kind of the history in the 20s and 30s was the pulpwood in the winter or the summer, it was catering to the fishermen and the farmers and the lumberyard business, coal business. And then in 1939, George's brother was diagnosed with inoperable cancer. And so George's oldest son, Bill, William S. Marvin, for whom this building is named, was called home by his father to help in the business. And he became the 8th employee in Marvin Lumber and Cedar, which is our parent company name still today. George had 5 sons and a daughter. 4 of the 5 Marvin sons went to war and fought. Bill Marvin stayed in Warroad. As the oldest son, he stayed here. Cal and Jack both fought in the Pacific. Tut Marvin was located on the East Coast. He was in the Coast Guard. And Frank Marvin flew for both the British and the American Air Force. For a short period of time during the war years, the company was involved in building granaries, building ammunition boxes, providing cattail fluff for a factory in Michigan for lifesavers. And then after the war, they had a 3-year contract with the Campbell Soup Company to sort peas. By the time the war was over, he had invested in a company up in Canada, so one son went up there to manage that. 2 of the other sons, along with Bill, worked with their father in the Marvin Company here in Warroad. One was in the seed house, had the marine shop. The other took over the lumberyard office from his dad. And then the 5th son went out on his own and built a resort down on the lake. His name was Cal, and he wanted to have his winters free for hockey. So he did the summer resort, which left his time in the winter for his passion. It was hard for George to see what Bill could see. And Bill really wanted the company to move forward and to provide employment for people who were coming back from the war. They wanted a place where young men could stay in Warroad and in the area. And so it was his vision that to be able to do this, they had to create more opportunity. And so in 1955, when George Marvin returned from a visit to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, he found out that Bill had gone ahead and purchased a piece of equipment. And actually, he had to break a hole in the wall of the building to move that equipment in. But George was very upset that Bill purchased this double end tensioner and a Madison molder. George felt we needed a new elevator instead. George felt Bill was going to break the company with the purchases that he made. Bill had so much vision and He just knew that this would be the right thing to do. What started it was, Harry York was a lumberyard manager for George, and he asked Bill to get a DeWalt saw so that he could make door frames in the wintertime to keep himself busy. And so that's the beginning of the window and door company as we know it. Bill and Margaret had 6 children, 4 sons and 2 daughters. And their youngest daughter is the president of Marvin Windows and Doors. Their oldest daughter worked for the company for a short period of time as a project manager for this building. And their 4 sons, 3 of whom are still with the company. Their second oldest son, Jake, is our CEO and chairman of the board. Frank Marvin is involved with customer relations, and Bob Marvin is retired. He was the transportation, vice president of transportation. The other story that is important to the Marvin family and to the company is that not only is their family, generations of their family working in the company and have worked, but many of our employees have had generations of their own families working in the company. So we have a display over here that shows pictures of families, some up to 4 generations, who are and have been working here. In 1932, George Marvin started at the 4th of July celebration giving nickels to children. And all they had to do was sign their name on a piece of paper, and they had to be 12 and under, and he would give them 2 nickels. And those pages have been kept through all these years, and you can find them in the museum. So we have generations of families that come, and they can find up to 3 and maybe 4 generations of their own family in these books. This gentleman was our first plant manager, Bob Wenzel. He is a commercial fisherman, and he came to work for George and manage the plant. And he didn't want to hire women in production, but there's a story on the board over there about the first 3 women that were in production, and they were excellent workers. And from then on, it was okay to hire women. This is a great story too. This lady was hired in 1957. She's still working for the company in accounts receivable. You can imagine all the changes she has seen. And 1957 was our first profit sharing, and this is the bag that she received her silver dollars in. The major fire was 1961, when the entire plant burned down. We did have 2 prior fires, 46 and 48. It wasn't such a huge loss for those 2 fires because we were just starting. 61, it was devastating. All of a sudden, 172 people don't have jobs, and the Marvin family actually got offers from towns outside of Warroad, outside of the area, to move their business, and they very strongly committed to this community and made the decision to stay here and rebuild. We have a wonderful story to tell, and the family thought it was important that it be documented. And actually the timing of the museum was perfect because the old hardware store building was being torn down. So many of the artifacts that were in that building are now in the museum. The elevator that stood out here along Highway 11 was torn down, and we've used those things in there. Many of our first employees were getting quite old, and so to be able to get their stories in print and documented was huge, because they actually lived it.
If If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.